Oh, you know what it is. And you're good to go. They're just off for now. It's just one little picture.
Good afternoon. So this is a quantum physics lecture, isn't it? No? Okay. Well, my name is Amanda Bankhausen. I am an adjunct professor in the religion department here at Calvin, and I work in abuse prevention and response. And it's my great pleasure to introduce today our guest speakers, Sheila Gregoire and Rebecca Lindenbach. They're going to talk with us and discuss with us sex. So the sex ed you should have had. Sheila and Rebecca are probably best known for their most recent books, The Great Sex Rescue, The Lies You've Been Taught and How to Recover What God Intended, and She Deserves Better, Raising Girls to Resist Toxic Teachings on Sex, Self, and Speaking Up. It's worth noting that both of those books are based on a survey that they conducted with evangelical or Christian women. There were about 28,000 women that participated in this survey. And it's probably the largest Christian survey that's been done on issues of sex and sexuality. And this survey was focused on marital and sexual satisfaction. And what they discovered is that some of the most popular teachings about sex have not only not contributed to sexual satisfaction, but have often led to harm. And so Sheila and Rebecca have committed their lives to correcting this. And in addition to writing books, they also co-host the Bear Marriage podcast, where they debunk harmful teachings about sex and promote a healthy, evidence-based biblical sexuality. So one of the reasons I get to introduce them today is because Sheila and I have known each other for very many years. We were actually housemates when we were in college, so at around the age that some of you here are at right now. And one of the things that I remember about Sheila is that even then, she had the capacity to startle me out of my uncritical acceptance of beliefs and practices that were, for lack of a better word, not good, not healthy, and not helpful. Things I thought or did simply because they were the way things had always been or what I had always been taught, she challenged. She would wonder and dream and poke and prod, questioning and pushing me and others to wonder if the way things are necessarily the way they should be. And now thinking back on that time that we had together, I realized that she was constantly looking for ways to help us lean more deeply into the goodness of the redeemed life that we have in Jesus Christ. And so somewhere along the way, she took all those critical thinking skills and she applied them to the matter of sex and sexuality. And she recognized and is helping us to recognize that sex is a gift from God and helping us to lean into the goodness and pleasure that God desires for us in sex. And so I want you to join me in giving a hearty Calvin welcome to the Christian sex ladies, Sheila Gregoire and Rebecca Lindenbach.
It's funny, what I remember most, Amanda, is us jumping on the couch singing Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler, but you know. So we are from Canada, so if we sound funny, it's because we are, and we did an 8-hour drive yesterday past all the dead deer along the I-69, which is a little traumatizing. But we are so thrilled to be able to be here and give this talk on the sex ed that you should have had. So we are going to be very informational today.
Yes. We're going to get very used to using very medically appropriate, explicit language. So we all just got to be cool with that.
Okay. Let me tell you how we all got started. So I was blogging and speaking about marriage and sex for about a decade before I actually read some of the best-selling evangelical books because I was afraid of plagiarizing, so I was kind of ignoring them. And when I did, I freaked out because a lot of the advice was terrible. And as a team, together, Rebecca wrote our survey. We have a third co-author, Joanna Sawatsky, who isn't here, who did all of our stats. And then Rebecca and I wrote our books together on how we can reclaim what God intended, because a lot of the stuff that's been taught in the church has just not helped and has actually harmed. And so what we did, first of all, was we surveyed 20,000 predominantly evangelical women for the Great Sex Rescue. We asked a minimum of 130 questions, and yeah, it was pretty devastating what we found.
After we did the Great Sex Rescue, which identified what's been causing the problem, we then wrote She Deserves Better, which was our attempt at preventing future problems. So we did a follow-up survey so we could dive into some more specific questions that we didn't do in our first one. So we did an additional 7,000. And so together with the two surveys, you end up with about 28,000 women total surveyed, which is pretty amazing.
Now, tomorrow night, we are going to be giving a talk mostly on this book about the purity culture myths that you were taught and how you all deserved better than purity culture and some of the ways that that has really impacted relationships. We're not going to do a lot of that today. Today, we are just going to get medical. Because let me tell you something we learned in our survey for She Deserves Better. Women my age had much better sex ed than women her age, and than women your age. In fact, I
had a worse sex education than my own mother, who was in charge of my sex education.
This is true. This is very, very true.
We've been open about this online already.
And a lot of it is because we emphasized abstinence so much that we replaced the idea of sex ed with just the idea of don't do it. And so instead of giving kids comprehensive sex ed, we just simply told them, God wants you to wait for marriage. And if you wait for marriage, it'll be amazing. If you don't wait for marriage, it'll be terrible, and you will go to hell, and everything will be bad. And that's basically all that we said. So one of the things that we did in our survey was we asked, can you identify these 10 words? And women my age could identify more
than women my age.
In fact, women my mother's age could identify more. We said, when you graduate high school, do you know what these words mean? And so this is a big problem, in that millennial, Gen Z, I'm Canadian. I'm going to say Gen Z if I want to say Gen Z. Millennial and Gen Z women just didn't know as much. And we would assume the same is true for men. We just did not survey men about their teenage experience. We did survey men, adult men, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about that tomorrow as well. Here's what's neat. The more words that women knew when they graduated high school, the better their self-esteem, the less likely they were to be assaulted, the less likely they were to marry abusers, the less likely they were to do risky behaviors. So there is no downside to more information.
So does anyone remember from the movie Mean Girls, the sex education scene? Right? You have the gym teacher out there and he's saying, if you have sex, you will get pregnant and you will die. If you have sex, you will get chlamydia and you will die. And what we found when we were going through the resources for teen girls, when we were reviewing for our book, She Deserves Better, is that a lot of evangelical teaching for girls about sex sounded remarkably like that Mean Girls scene. So for example,
you go ahead and read it.
This is from Shannon Etheridge's book, Every Young Woman's Battle. It says this: do you want to live to walk down the aisle at your wedding someday? To hold your own babies in your arms after giving birth? To see your children grow up and make you a grandma? To grow old with your husband? If so, please pay close attention as we examine the possible consequences of losing the physical battle for sexual purity. Do you want to live? That's really terrifying, isn't it?
But what often happened is that we replaced sex ed with half-truths, fear tactics, and often flat-out lies. And that ends up hurting people. It doesn't help. And so what we all should have known in sex ed, and what we want to talk about today, is everybody needs to know how your bodies work. Okay? So in this talk, we are not going to tell you morality around sexuality. I think that's something that you've all heard, and so much of the sex ed has been taught solely in moral terms, and we've neglected the actual medical stuff. So we're going to talk about how reproduction works and how sex works from medical terms. And that's partly because you can only make a choice with informed consent. And when all you're taught is don't do it, but you aren't taught what it is that you're not supposed to do and how things work, then is that really informed consent? So we want to make sure that just everybody knows what we're talking about.
So we're about to put some graphics up on the screen to talk about how our bodies work.
So here we go. Let's start with the woman. Eggs. Let's start with eggs. When you are born, you have all the eggs in your body that you are ever going to need or use. So they are not produced constantly. They are there at birth, and they are in the ovaries. Every month, your ovaries will release an egg, and sometimes several, that will go into the fallopian tubes. Now, and then they'll just hang around there for about 48 hours. 24 to 48 hours they'll remain viable. Now, if those eggs come in contact with sperm, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the sperm will travel up the vagina, through the cervix, up the uterus, and into the fallopian tubes. Then you can have conception. And that's where conception happens usually, is the fallopian tubes. And then that embryo will travel down into the uterus and will implant there. If, in a very, very, very rare case, the embryo implants in the fallopian tubes, that actually is fatal for both the mother and the baby. That's very, very dangerous. This is not to tell you that you should worry about this, because it is very rare. But just so that you know, that's called an ectopic pregnancy, and there is no way that that baby can live. And so sometimes in debates about abortion, right now, it's even, in some states, it's like, can doctors even deal with ectopic pregnancy? So it's very interesting that we don't always understand how sometimes an embryo isn't viable if it's not in the right place. Now, at the point where that egg is released, the uterus goes, hey, I better get ready in case we're going to get pregnant. And so it starts thickening the lining. There's a lot more blood in the uterus just to get ready so that it's a nice, hospitable place in case there's a baby. But if there isn't any baby, then about 2 weeks later, the body is going to shed all of that lining and all the extra blood. It goes through the cervix, down the vagina, and out the body, and that's your period. That's basically it. I do want to say one thing about the cervix, because people don't know this. I was talking to a young woman who is currently 32 weeks pregnant, and many of you may have heard during labor, she's dilated. Is she 3 centimeters dilated? Is she 10 centimeters dilated? And what this woman thought is, well, we'll be able to tell because we'll just take a measuring tape and we'll see, because she thought you were checking if your vagina was dilated, but you're not. What dilates is the cervix. So that's the part that stays closed most of the time, pretty closed. But in labor, that will open, and about 10 centimeters, that's when labor
gets going.
Really gets going. And at 8 centimeters, it gets awfully uncomfortable. But so that is more or less the female reproductive cycle.
Now let's talk about the dudes. So this is the male reproductive cycle. So unlike women, men actually consistently produce sperm. So they will produce sperm in the testes and in the epididymis. As well, they'll produce semen in the seminal vesicle as well as in the prostate gland. So when a man ejaculates, both sperm and semen are combined to make the ejaculate. So sperm is the stuff that actually combines with the egg to make the baby. The semen is kind of like it's a fluid that allows the sperm to actually swim against something to get up there, and it keeps the sperm kind of happy and nutritioned, all of that stuff. So my brain just fogged up there for a second. But this is a fun fact. So when you get a vasectomy, the thing you snip is actually the vas deferens there. So that's the kind of tube that you snip. So you keep the semen, but you don't have the sperm. So that's why they call it shooting blanks, because stuff's still coming out. I don't know if any of you saw the Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode where Terry gets a vasectomy and Jake Paul's like, "You're gonna cut your penis off." No, that's not what happens during a vasectomy. It's a snip-snip, not a chop-chop. So that's how men work. So when a man gets aroused, the way that it works is blood will rush to the penis. It will become erect or hard. So in order for intercourse to happen, which we're going to get into in a little bit as well, the penis does have to be erect because that's what gives it the stiffness that is required. So that is that.
Okay. Let's talk about some menstruation facts. So just some facts about your period. So cycles can vary in length a lot. Anywhere from like 25 to 36 days can be considered, even shorter, but if you have a shorter period, my poor lovelies. Anyway, but so 25 to 36 is roughly normal. It can vary, even not just women to women, but month to month, depending on stress, depending on nutrition, depending on sleep, what's going on in your life. But most women will tend to have pretty consistent, like maybe you're roughly 28 days. Some months might be 27, some months might be 29, but you tend to even out in what works for you. Periods themselves can also vary in length, anywhere from 3 to 7 days. Again, if you're a 21-day cycle and you're a 7-day person, please see your doctor because you might have iron deficiency, and I really feel sorry for you. But it doesn't mean there's necessarily something wrong. There can be great variation in a lot of these things. Also, just a quick note that some men may not realize is that women can't control it. It's not like you can hold in the blood or just let it go. It just comes out when it wants to, which is why we can leak, and it's difficult.
Especially if you sneeze.
Yes, if you sneeze, yeah. And that's when, even the tampon can just come right out. Anyway, it's bad. If that happens to you, see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. But pain can also vary from woman to woman. Some women don't really feel a lot of pain, don't get a lot of cramping, and some women get a whole lot to the extent that labor doesn't bother them that much because they don't notice a big difference. If that's you, again, please see a physician because that's not necessarily normal.
Yeah, some other times you'd want to see a doctor is if as we said, there is some variation from cycle to cycle, but if there's a lot of variation, like you're going 3 months without a period and then you're kind of bleeding for 40 days straight, or if you're having a 21-day and then a 40-day and then a 25-day and then a 50-day, see a doctor in those kinds of situations because there might be something else going on. As well, if your pain is extreme, please do see a doctor. I will say one of the big issues for women, especially in the medical area, is that women's pain is not taken seriously. And so I even have a story of that. I went to 3 different doctors when I was in university because I was having to take 5 days off of school during my period because I was vomiting and passing out on my bathroom floor. So it was so bad, and everyone just said, well, just get an IUD or just go on birth control. And I've said, I've done birth control before, and it's not good for me. I can't do birth control. And eventually, when I got pregnant and finally got my first ultrasound, they found a massive golf ball-sized cyst, which would explain everything, right? But no one took my pain seriously. So don't be afraid to be annoying. I should have been more annoying. Be annoying. If you need to see a doctor for this kind of stuff, you're going to have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, and I should also say, too, if you're not having periods, that could be a sign of an eating disorder, too. You should be having periods. And so, please see a physician if you're not. Oh, yes.
The funny thing about this, and I'm sure that you can all agree after hearing us talk about periods, especially my own personal experience for a little bit, that this quote should be very funny to you. Talking about your body, and this was in the context of periods, not like body, like periods, in front of guys may be normal, but it also normalizes sexual familiarity. And that's a risk to your purity. There is a weird taboo about this stuff, in evangelicalism especially. I worked as a lifeguard, and there was just a giant box of tampons in the office, and everyone knew they were there, and no one felt any more sexually familiar for knowing that. In fact, gonna be honest, kind of made it a little easier to be like, oh, yeah, okay, we're just gonna get a little distance right now. So we just want to make sure, we did a part of our survey that actually looked at embarrassment around your period, and we found that women who felt a lot of shame or embarrassment about just how our bodies work had a lot of negative outcomes, including self-esteem, pretty much all of our negative outcomes that you'll hear about tomorrow, too.
Yeah. Okay, so how does the fertility cycle work? Think of the first day of her period as day 1 of your cycle. And then she'll have her period, let's say, for 5 days. And usually somewhere between day 11 and day 18, somewhere around there, she'll ovulate. And that egg will stick around, like we said, for about 48 hours. Sperm, on the other hand, are viable for up to 5 days. So that means that there's a period of time that is roughly 5 days before ovulation, 4 or 5 days before, and then that other time after ovulation too, where she can get pregnant. Okay, so there is that window. Now, you can't get pregnant when the egg is not viable and the sperm doesn't have time to reach the egg. But you don't actually know when that's going to be very easily. So it's best not to assume that, oh, it's okay, we're not in the fertility window now, because women can ovulate at different days. So if you have sex 3 days before ovulation, for instance, that sperm is still around when she ovulates, and that's how you can get pregnant. All right. Yes.
So now that we've talked about pregnancy, let's talk about contraception. So contraception is specifically what prevents pregnancy, okay? Contraception is, an example would be tracking methods, which is what Mom was talking about here, where you have a counting method. And this can work. Done perfectly, it has a very good success rate. The problem is that the requirements to do it perfectly are so stringent. You have to know your temperature every single day at the exact same time of day. You have to be checking your cervical mucus to see if it is showing that you've ovulated or not. You have to be on top of it, and you have to be really focused. And any change to your general life schedule, like stress, can cause you to delay ovulation. And if you're not checking perfectly, you might be going based on an assumption, and oops, you're pregnant. So this is something that can definitely work for some people, but the problem is that it's not reliable. And we've also seen a lot of stuff happening online where especially a lot of Christian YouTubers have been talking about natural family planning and fertility awareness methods on YouTube for a while. And I can hear them all now in my head. They talk about how they're doing the tracking method. It's working great for them. And they're like, yeah, we've been married for 3 years. We haven't gotten pregnant yet. But I also know of about 4 or 5 at the top of my head where then the next couple videos are our infertility journey. The problem is that you don't know why it's working. And so taking advice from people online is not the best way to figure out what contraception method would work for you, because often it's people who are most excited about it may have another reason why it's working for them. And a lot of accidental babies have happened on the tracking method.
Yes. Okay, the next are barrier methods. So this is any physical barrier that prevents the sperm from meeting up with the egg. And the most common one we think of is the condom. And I want to read to you something that Dana Gresh wrote about condoms. She said this: I hope this isn't TMI, but there are 13 steps to using condoms. Now, we can't figure out what those 13 steps are.
I wish we could show you the FaceTime conversation that she and I and our co-author had. We're like, would unwrapping it be 4 steps or 1 step?
Is getting in the car to go to the drugstore one of them? Like, they're not that hard, people. This is what we call fear tactics, okay? The end result is that they have a controversial failure rate in preventing any sexually transmitted infection. You can research it yourself on the internet to see how varied the estimates are, but I'm going to go with the conservative estimates that they fail about 50% of the time. There's no citation to this. And I cannot find a single peer-reviewed study that says that condoms fail 50% of the time.
We can find some that say that they're only used about 50% of the time. That makes sense.
Yes, but not that they fail. All right. So we have condoms. We have diaphragms, which is it's a. Do you want to talk about this
Sure.
one?
So, well, first of all, let's explain how to use a condom. First of all, okay. The very minimal steps to using a condom are this: make sure it's not expired. Condoms do expire. The latex can get rough and it can break. Okay. Open it up. Try not to use your teeth or scissors so it doesn't break. Okay. And then what you do is you look to figure out which side is inside out, and you want to put the part that should be on the inside on the tip of the penis, and then you roll it onto the penis. You don't unroll it first and then put it on the penis, or else it's going to inflate like a balloon at the end, and that's just going to be weird. So you want to roll it onto the penis all the way down, and then that's how you put on a condom. And then again, you're just don't break it. So don't put your teeth on it. Don't use scissors on it. And make sure that the condom is on the entire time you are having sex. This isn't something you put on right before you ejaculate. This is something that it should be on the entire time that you are having sex. That's how you use a condom. Diaphragms are small discs that you insert into the vagina, and they pretty much block off the cervix, and you often cover them in a spermicide. Spermicide is a gel that kills sperm. A lot of people swear by diaphragms. My gynecologist says that diaphragms work great until you get pregnant. She said that there's no way that she would recommend it to anyone who isn't, like, it might be okay if we have a baby, but or not. Like, if you're not wishy-washy about having a baby, a diaphragm is not necessarily a great option because they can, in fact, get jostled during sex, which makes sense. Stuff is happening down there. So the safest barrier method is absolutely a condom.
The one thing about diaphragms that often people like about them is that you can insert them hours ahead of time so that they are ready for you, whereas that doesn't work with others. So you can be more spontaneous.
That, unfortunately, is part of the reason why they don't work as well, though,
because then they we're just not really big fans, but that's what they will say about those. Okay, then there's hormonal methods, which are the ones that I think Christians are actually the most likely to use. Things like the pill, the IUD, that one's a difficult one. There's some pills that are more hormonal than others, or some IUDs that are more hormonal than others, but those tend to be with hormonal methods. There's the ring, but all of them, what they do is women take a hormone either orally or through the IUD letting off the hormone or through a ring, which tells your body, hey, you're pregnant, you don't need to ovulate. And so they can prevent ovulation. The IUD, which is a device which is inserted by a physician and can stay in for 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, and it's called an intrauterine device.
Yes.
So that's what IUD stands for.
So they insert it up the cervix, and it can prevent the cervix from receiving sperm because it creates more mucus around it, and it becomes really inhospitable. That's what it does. It makes the uterus nice and inhospitable to sperm.
I've learned that the medical term inhospitable just means really, really sticky.
Yes. Yes. So the IUD is good if you have years that you know that you don't want to get pregnant. And the pill, you can go on it. Often people will recommend going on it before you're married. You'll hear people say this because you can plan then when you're going to have your period, because nobody wants their period on their honeymoon, and so you can make it all work. We're going to talk about that later, right?
No, the pill can also have some side effects too that I do think are worth talking about. I will say, I already mentioned this myself personally. The pill was terrible for me. I got incredibly suicidal. Not exactly what you want. So I got off that real quick. And so do be aware that if you ever tried the pill and then all of a sudden life doesn't seem worth living anymore, that might be a logical conclusion to jump to. As well, the pill does have a very well-recorded rate of reducing felt libido for women, because the way that it works is it takes all of our natural hormonal swings and it pretty much bottoms them out. So if you've already kind of been sexually active and understand your libido cycle and then go on the pill, you might be able to notice if your libido's gone down. But what happens to a lot of especially conservative Christian women is they go on the pill before they become sexually active at all, and then they wonder, well, why do I hate sex? Why don't I want this? And then they get off the pill and they're like, whoa!
We get this all the time. I get emails all the time where women will go off the pill to get pregnant, and they're like, oh, I have a libido.
So just that is something to be aware of, that it can be good to have a baseline sometimes with a non-hormonal option such as condoms. If you're a newlywed and you're trying to figure things out, that is a thing to consider.
Yeah. And then there's permanent methods where a tubal ligation, which is a more, it's a surgery that's a lot more involved for women than the equivalent for men, which is a vasectomy. So often physicians might do this in conjunction with a cesarean section, for instance, if you know it's going to be your last child, because it is an it is a surgery where they actually do go open you up, as opposed to a vasectomy, which is just a day procedure.
Snip, snip.
Snip, snip. One thing that you'll notice of all of these is that the things that women do for contraception require a fair amount of work or sacrifice. So natural family planning or fertility awareness method, it means that you're constantly charting, you're checking your temperature, you're checking your cervical mucus. You can't go wrong. Diaphragms, you got to insert those things. You got to clean them. It's just, it can be difficult, and they're not 100%. The pill is hormonal. The IUD does have some pain with insertion, and it's hormonal too. And tubal ligations are definitely harder than vasectomies. Condoms are really easy, and they're really cheap, and it means there's no mess afterwards too. And I have talked to so many men in what I do who say, oh, but I just want to feel free and I don't want anything between us. Condoms have evolved so much in the last few years that you really don't feel them very much. And for a guy to say, I don't want a barrier, and so therefore I want you to take on all the labor of contraception, that's a lot. Now, if she willingly wants to do one of these things, that's fine. But I just want you to be aware of the disparity, is that condoms are very easy. You put it on, you take it off, you're done. The other methods are either much more difficult or they really affect her.
Yeah, now let's talk about the non-methods. I like to call these the non-methods. There's two general methods that people talk about in terms of preventing pregnancy, such as the pull-out method. The pull-out method is when people say, oh, we're just doing the pull-out. What they do is they have sex, and then before he feels like he's going to ejaculate, he will pull out of her and ejaculate not into her. Here's the problem. A man can actually release sperm in what's called pre-ejaculate, which is just kind of like little spurts. That's kind of the best way to describe it. It's just little spurts. It's like hello, we're on our way. So that can actually happen before the actual final orgasm, and he doesn't know when that's happening. That can kind of happen slowly over the entire sexual encounter. So you might have been getting a couple little swimmers the whole time that you're being safe, and then kind of pulling out, and well, you're already pregnant. So pull-out is not an appropriate birth control method. It's just not. The other one is trust the Lord.
We will just have as many babies as the Lord.
And if you want to have 15 babies, that's fine. That's a great method to have children. It is not a great method to prevent having children. The Lord has created you to be fertile. Most of us, that's the way that our bodies have been created. And so trusting the Lord will probably end up in a baby. This is something where, again, there are personal convictions about birth control, about contraception. You are allowed to have a personal conviction, but this is not something that is necessitated by the entirety of Christendom. And so please understand that trusting the Lord is not birth control. It is trusting the Lord, you're going to have a baby.
Now, with all of those methods up there is only one that actually works to prevent STIs and STDs, and that is the condom. All the other ones are not going to do anything about STIs and STDs, and so let's turn to those first. So if you are going to prevent these, use a condom. Yes, you can also use a dental dam for oral sex, because that you can get STDs that way as well.
Yeah, dental dam is also known as a female condom, so it goes over top of the woman's bits, and it goes over top of the entire vulva, and some of them are designed to also go a bit into the vagina so that you're kind of covered.
Yes. And the other big way to prevent one of the most dangerous STDs for women is HPV, human papillovirus. And the Gardasil vaccine does work to prevent that virus. The reason you don't want to get that is because HPV is responsible for the majority of cervical cancers. And those are the kind of cancers you get at 31 when you've got 2 little kids. And nobody wants that. And so a lot of conservative Christians, and the Gardasil vaccine came out when you were around that age, and I was like, well, she doesn't need it because she's going to wait until marriage. But you never know who you're going to marry, and if you marry someone who has been sexually active, so even if you as a female are like, no, I'm going to wait, you don't know who you're going to marry. And not to be alarmist, but there's also the assault issue, right, where you could be assaulted. And so this is just something that's worth thinking about if you haven't had that vaccine.
So that is the other thing that we wanted to say is if you have ever been sexually active, whether it was with or without your consent, that is a reason to get tested. There's a lot of shame around that often, but there doesn't need to be. This is just a medical test. But it's really important to do because you need to have all the information. You need to treat it if you do have something, and it's just so much easier to deal with if you deal with it quickly. So,
yeah, and we do want to say too, if you're one where the problem is a case of assault, it is so important to get tested, but please see a counselor too. Get a friend to go with you. Just get some help, because that's a horribly traumatic thing to have to go through, and then to also deal with, well, what if I've caught something? That's just really hard, and you shouldn't have to go through that alone, and you're not supposed to. You really don't have to.
So that's what we are going to say about the kind of reproductive medical side of things. Now we're going to talk about sexual function. So before we get there, let's ask the question, what is sex?
Anybody want to give a definition? Nobody wants to give a definition.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. A lot of people say penis and vagina. He puts his penis into her vagina, and then the Lord blesses their union, and a child is produced, right? That's what we often think about with sex, right? But that leaves out a lot of stuff. What about if a couple is pregnant and there's a medical complication and she can't have penetrative sex the entire 9 months, but they can do other stuff? Have they not had sex for 9 months? What about not straight couples? Can they just not have sex?
If they're not doing penis and vagina?
Exactly. Yes. So sex is about more than just intercourse. Sex is any activity that people are doing in order to bring each other to orgasm. If you're doing something to bring yourself to orgasm, that's called masturbation. So that's our definition of sex here. Mm-hmm. So
let's talk about the female reproductive system and the sexual function of it. Yeah. So this is the outer, is this mine or is this yours? I don't even remember. I'll just do it. Yeah. So this is the outer portion of what a woman looks like, yes. And you can see the mons pubis is just the entire part. Actually, I think you were going to do this.
Sure. The mons pubis is like the fleshy part of your vulva. Okay, so this is all called the vulva. Your vulva has a bunch of lips or crevices and folds. The outside ones are called the labia majora. The inner ones tend to be pinker and more thin skin. They're called the labia minora. At the top of the vaginal opening, you're going to find the urethra. That's the urethral opening. That's where your pee comes out of. So no, it's not all one hole, okay? So you have the urethra's right there, then you have the vaginal opening, and then at the very top there you have the clitoris. The clitoris is a hooded organ, and that is the one that is responsible for female sexual pleasure. So the male system is both reproductive and sexual in one. The woman's system is actually kind of split up a little bit. So the clitoris is really where the woman's getting her pleasure from.
Now, there's also the hymen. We get a lot of questions about that, specifically about does it hurt when you breaks? And you hear this a lot in medieval literature, you know, how people would stand outside the door of when the couple goes in after they get married, and you have to bring out the bloody sheets to prove that she was a virgin. That's not the way the hymen works. Lots of women don't have much of one. Some break it earlier when they're just running around as a kid or riding a bike. It doesn't necessarily break on the wedding night. Now, for some women, it does, and it can bleed like a tiny bit, but it really shouldn't hurt that much. If you are aroused, it shouldn't hurt that much, if at all, for the hymen to break. If it does hurt, that is something that you might want to see a doctor about, because there are some conditions where the hymen, a perforated hymen or a hymen that actually does need to be surgically removed. That's very rare. We're not trying to scare you, but it is one reason why it's a good idea to get checked. If you are, for instance, waiting for sex for your wedding, please get checked beforehand just to make sure there's nothing like that going on.
Yeah. And typically, if there's something like that, you're going to find that tampons really hurt.
Yes, yes. Okay, let's talk about the clitoris. This is what the clitoris actually looks like. Did you know that it is only in the last 20 years that they've even figured this out? They decided to do tons and tons and tons of research on everything, but the one organ that gives women female pleasure, we don't need to research that. It's not that important. Okay, it is. And so this is what it actually looks like, where the clitoris has roots that go around the vagina, that can go up the vaginal wall, so that it isn't that you only feel pleasure from the part that is external. There actually are internal parts that can also feel pleasure as you move around and as it comes into contact. So it is an important thing to learn about and learn where it is, even if it looks very small from the outside. Okay. We just completed another survey of both men and women for our marriage book that's coming out next year. And so we decided to ask both men and women, how old were you when you found out that the female orgasm existed? Because an orgasm is necessary for a baby to be made. So basically, men get excited, the penis gets hard, the excitement builds up, and then the man ejaculates and releases the semen inside her or wherever else, okay? That's obvious. And you were taught about this as a kid when you learned how babies were made. You learned that the man has to put something out there that comes into contact with the egg. But very rarely are we actually taught that the woman can actually reach orgasm too, because the man's orgasm is necessary for reproduction, the woman's is not. And so a lot of people go through their lives without realizing that women can reach orgasm as well. So excitement can build until there's this big release, which is very pleasurable. It makes you feel very sleepy afterwards. There's a lot of hormonal releases. It's great. So one thing you may notice is that more men knew that the female orgasm existed than women. Anyone want to guess why? Yeah, because teenage boys are more likely to watch porn than teenage girls are. But this does play a big role in women's satisfaction later. The younger she is when she learns that an orgasm existed, in general, the less likely she is to marry an abuser, the less likely she is to get assaulted, the more likely she is to have sexual pleasure later. So again, no downside to more information.
So let's talk about what actually leads to orgasm then. So obviously, intercourse is one form of sex. For the man, it's pretty clear how intercourse leads to orgasm. I'm going to ask you right now, we're going to picture what, in essence, male masturbation would look like. The action that men tend to do to masturbate is to, kind of rub the penis with their hand. And it's the same action that happens during intercourse. So just general friction to that area kind of works, right? So for women, though, the type of stimulation that tends to lead to orgasm is more clitoral than it is kind of the in and out of sex. So when it comes to intercourse, that can often be a little bit of an impasse for couples. And instead of saying, well, oh, well, I guess you're not going to get there, honey. Just figure out how to work other stuff in there, right? So the other types of stimulation that are most common that lead to orgasm are manual and oral. Manual just means with your fingers. People use fingers on the clitoris itself or insert it into the vagina and moved in. Genuinely, there's not a right way to do it. The right way to do it is the way that feels good. So this is not the situation to be like, but I read an article in Men's Health, honey. This is not that situation, okay? And then the same with oral sex. So for a man, performing oral sex on a man is called fellatio. Performing oral sex on a woman is called cunnilingus. Our study, as well as many others, have actually found that oral sex and manual stimulation are the most consistent ways to reach orgasm for women, even when intercourse is involved. Most couples who have the female orgasming consistently, they do a combination of intercourse with manual stimulation.
This does not mean that she cannot reach orgasm through intercourse. Many women can, especially if you try and make a note to put pressure on the clitoris at the same time. Okay, let's talk about the sexual response cycle, because this is something that a lot of people don't understand. When a man gets excited, the penis gets erect, and then it gets a little bit thicker, it gets a little bit harder, but it kind of looks exactly the same the whole time, and then he ejaculates. A woman is very different. Women we all go through this cycle of excitement where you're just starting to get tingly, you're just starting to get, thinking sexual thoughts, your body is starting to turn on. But for men, excitement and plateau almost to orgasm are going to look really similar. He's going to get hard and just going to get more and more excited. For women at excitement, this is when she might start to get a little bit lubricated. So the vagina secretes lubrication, which makes it easier for intercourse to happen. Her nipples will start to get erect. Her clitoris will even get erect. So women get erections too. And she'll start to, feel tingly. She might feel a bit of a tugging on the clitoral area. And then arousal is when all of that gets amped up. And here's the key thing. If you try to stimulate a woman, like go straight for the clitoris, all these things that all these sex manuals told you that she liked, so you go straight for the clitoris before she's excited, it's going to feel like a pap smear. It is not a pleasant experience. Like if you go right for the genitals before she's even slightly in the mood, it feels very invasive. So you want to wait until she's actually aroused. So think of excitement when you're kissing, you're touching, you're playing with her hair, you're blowing it, whatever, I don't know, whatever she likes. And then arousal is when you're starting to actually do things that directly contribute to orgasm. Plateau is when you're almost there, but you're not quite. And for women, especially once you're at plateau, you just want to do exactly the same thing. Do not change it up, because if you change it up, she might lose some excitement, and that's not what you want. So once you get to plateau, you just do exactly the same thing, and then you get to orgasm. So women are different at each stage than men are. And often if a guy is really excited, he'll assume that she wants the same type of stimulation that he wants. And so he'll go right for the genitals. Please don't. Now, here's what's interesting. For those of you who want to wait for marriage for sex, but you're good with kissing, you probably spend an awful lot of time in the excitement phase, right? So you're kissing a lot, you're holding hands, you're touching, you're doing all this fun stuff. And maybe you're even getting a little bit aroused, but, so all of this is happening and things are getting really, really good. And then you get married, and now you don't have to do all that stuff like kissing, because you can go straight for the other stuff. And so all of a sudden, women feel like, well, I thought I would like sex, but I don't. But it's because you're not spending all your time in the excitement phase anymore. You're skipping it, and you can't skip any of these stages if you want to get to orgasm. So you have to keep doing the stuff that makes her excited. Don't just go right for intercourse or right for the genitals because now you're allowed to.
The other thing that is different between men and women is that after the orgasm, both of us have something called a refractory period. The refractory period is the amount of time that is needed before you can go through the cycle again, have another orgasm. For men, it tends to be quite a while. Their bodies need to recuperate.
Yeah, so we're talking like 45 minutes often,
yeah,
30
often,
to 30
on
to
average.
60 minutes. Yeah.
Women have the ability to have multiple orgasms. So women's refractory period can be quite short or even non-existent and can circle right back to that plateau orgasm stage. So you can get in a situation where sex having no excitement. Yeah. Oh yeah. Booyah. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Huh. You can get into that kind of situation with women, okay? So when you hear people talking about how sex is for men and God designed sex for women to give sex to men, or a woman's responsibility is to keep a man satisfied because sex is for men. God made women with the multiple orgasms. This is for both of you.
Yes.
Okay? This is not only for one.
Okay. Now let's talk about, what's that?
Yeah, really quick, we'll talk about sexual health and hygiene.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Exactly. So some medical tests that you should be knowing about are pap smears. Please talk to your doctor to know if it's medically suggested that you get one. As well, like we said, STD tests. Yeast infections are a big one. If you smell something weird going on, and men can get these too, by the way. If you smell something weird going on and you're like, this smells very strong and I'm uncomfortable and there's lots of discharge, please talk to a doctor. Don't just use raspberry chocolate scented body wash. Please don't. Please talk to a doctor. Additionally, UTIs can often happen. Some people are just prone to UTIs. You'll get them from, it seems like pretty much anything, and I'm very sorry if that's you. They can also be caused by poor hygiene. It's not always caused by poor hygiene, but it's more, it can often happen if fecal matter from the back ends up at the front. That's what happens sometimes. So just make sure that everyone's clean and that we're really taking care of that.
Okay, we're gonna go through now and make this a little bit practical and applicable for you. So what does all of this mean if you are dating? Okay, so if you are currently dating someone, please know desire is normal. You should be wanting to have sex with the person that you are dating and potentially marrying. This doesn't mean that you should actually do it, but you should want to. And if you don't want to, that is not a sign that you are holier than other people. It might be a sign that you're not attracted to them. And that does need to be taken seriously.
There really is. Additionally, a lot of people say that they accidentally had sex or accidentally got pregnant. So remember that if you are trying to, abstain, or if you're trying to wait, remember that sexual response cycle and realize, oh, we are rocking it up that sexual response cycle pretty quickly. What often happens is couples will be together and you'll be kissing and watching a movie and it'll be so nice and it'll be like 7 hours of foreplay. And then all of a sudden you accidentally have sex and it's like, well, yeah, you've been building up your body for so long. So that's the thing to remember is how your body works and how arousal can get really, really, really strong. And so make sure that you're just keeping the sexual arousal cycle in mind if that's your goal.
And then also while you're dating, there are several different types. Wait, did I miss one? Oh, there's several different types of going too far.
Yeah. In our purity culture discussions that we looked at, one of the things that I found really sad was how boundaries during dating was talked about because it combined these three into one. First of all, there's a couple who say they were waiting to have sex, and they both end up just going farther than they intended because, like I said, they were watching a movie, they were kissing 7 hours later, oops, right? And both of them made the decision. It was both of them wanted it, and both of them were like, okay, we should try to roll things back a bit. That's one. That's called consensual sex. Okay? That is consensual sex. There's also a situation where one of those people may choose to have sex that the other person does not want. This can happen by wearing down someone's boundaries. We heard stories all the time of women who were in situations where they were saying no, the boy would pull back, He would go a little further again. She'd say no again. He'd pull back, go further again. She'd say no over and over and over again. He wasn't respecting her no. He was trying to wear her down. And eventually she was just like, he's never going to stop. I'm alone with this boy, an hour away from civilization. I'll just give in. That's not consent, okay? Not all of these things are the same thing. And that is important to understand, and that is something that many people have not been told appropriately. Additionally, like I said, that sexual arousal cycle can be very, very strong. And that can also be weaponized against you. If you are communicating clearly to your partner, I really don't want to do X, Y, or Z. And if I go, and so please, let's not do those things. And then they are using arousal weaponized against you to try to get you to do those things. That is also unacceptable. That is very different than two people together going too far because they got excited together. One person teasing and arousing deliberately another person to get what they want sexually is a form of assault that's often called arousal noncompliance as well. Where you can actually have sex when your body is really into it, but your mind is thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want this, or frozen. So just because your body responds does not mean that you consented. That's a very important thing to grasp. We actually have examples of this in books that are written to teenagers where there are examples of people who sinned and went too far and who are now sexually impure because they made decisions, but they're just describing rape by coercion and arousal non-concordance. And what that means, non-concordance, is when your brain and your body don't agree. So I want to make sure that we said that. Like in dating relationships, consent absolutely matters. Not everything is a question of just virginity. Not everything is a question even of whether or not you went too far. Some of it is genuinely about consent.
Yep. 82% myth. Shanti Felden, in her book For Young Women Only, said that 82% of boys feel little ability or little responsibility to stop in a make-out situation. And the conclusion was, if you want to stop, it's safest to not even start. And this was said to teenage girls. 100% of boys have the ability to stop. 100% of boys have the responsibility to stop. So we need to stop with that kind of talk. Really quick too, blue balls, blue bean. That's the idea that if I get aroused and I don't have an orgasm, I will be in so much pain. And so if you get me aroused, you're responsible for bringing me to orgasm so that I'm not in pain. Studies have shown that there is a minority, we're talking under 10%, of both men and women who can be in an awful lot of pain. Okay? Just because you are in pain doesn't mean that the other person needs to relieve that pain. You are still responsible for your own body. And women and men both can feel discomfort at this, but men are 10 times more likely to use this to pressure their partner than women. And so let's get rid of that idea that is an acceptable thing to do. Okay. What does this mean, moving towards marriage? Think carefully about contraception. And remember the natural sexual progression, okay? It doesn't stop just because you're married. You don't get to stop making out. You still need to take things slow. And let's rethink the honeymoon. Because often the idea is, let's just wait until we're married and then we get to have sex. And it becomes not just we get to have sex, but we have to have sex. That can be very, very difficult, especially for women to go from 0 to 60 in one night. And it doesn't bear good fruit long term if you do things that she isn't ready for. And the reason I'm talking about she is because sex is far more likely to be uncomfortable for her than it is for him. So instead of thinking, let's get married so that we can have sex, rethink the honeymoon. So the order, if you are waiting, is let's just get comfortable being naked, okay? Let's just be comfortable being naked. Then let's figure out how to get her aroused or even bring her to orgasm. And then and only then do you get to try intercourse. For some people, that will all happen in one night, and for some people, it might take several weeks. It doesn't matter. Because if you do it in that order, you will set yourselves up for years of much better sex than if you have to undo something later. And then finally, beware but not scared of sexual pain disorders. Evangelical women, this was a big part of our research, suffer from sexual pain at about 2.5 times the rate of the general population. So vaginismus is a sexual pain disorder that in the general population is at around 7%, where the muscles in the vaginal wall contract and make penetration extremely difficult, if not impossible. Evangelical women have a rate of about 23%. And it's largely linked both to the way that we do the honeymoon, in rushing sex when she's not aroused, and in some of the teachings that we've given to especially teenage girls, and we'll talk about some of those tomorrow night. Okay. Now, let's just give some super quick stats. When we asked both men and women, had you ever had an orgasm before you got married, 95% of men said yes, versus 59% of women. When we asked couples who waited until marriage for penetrative sex, so they had never had consensual penetrative sex before, and we said, had you reached orgasm with your spouse before the first time you tried intercourse, okay? 34% said no, neither of us did. 29%, both of them did. 27% the husband did, and 10% the wife did. During the first sexual encounter that included intercourse, who reached orgasm? 11.5% neither, 14% both, 73% husband, 1% wife. So if we add that up, that means that before you tried intercourse, 38.5% of women and 56% of men had already been brought to climax by their spouse. So whose climax is being prioritized? His. Who has a really easy time reaching climax? Him. Who should have been prioritized? Her. And then at first sexual encounter, maybe it's not so surprising, but 87% of men reached orgasm. And this isn't just reaching orgasm through intercourse. This is reaching orgasm through any method at all. 87% in the first encounter that included intercourse of men did, and 15% of women.
Right. So there's actually a really cool study that came out of the University of Toronto, representing Canada, that actually found that we have this myth or this belief that men just want sex more than women, right? There was a study that came out that found that if the first time a woman has sex, she orgasms, her rates of desiring sex are at the same rate as men. So this isn't a problem of men versus women. This is a problem of what we've trained our brains to associate. So if you start out with sex being really pleasurable, your brain's going to want it more. If you start out with sex being uncomfortable, awkward, or just kind of a nothing burger, then it's going to not really want it as much. It makes sense. So the way that we use this information is when you are starting your sex life, at some point in your life, if you start on this journey, just keep this in mind, that this can be great for women, but it just takes a little bit more focus, and it takes making her the priority. And if that happens, it's actually great for both people. Mm-hmm. And that's the exact same when you're married.
Yep. The other thing is, sex is the culmination of a great marriage. This is what we really want you to remember. It is not the cause of a great marriage. And if you want sex to be great, it comes from emotional health, physical health, relationship security, emotional connection, and physically satisfying sex. And when you have all of those things, she's going to have desire, and so is he. But if you're missing some of those things, it's quite likely the desire and libido is going to fall. So if someone has no libido, don't yell at them for having no libido. Don't say, maybe you're just not sexual. Don't say, what's wrong with you? Don't you know God gave this beautiful gift to you? Why are you rejecting it? Don't say, don't you love me? You're supposed to care about my needs. Say, which of these things are we not working on? And right now, if you are single and you're hoping for marriage one day, start working on some of these other things, like emotional health. Work on your own emotional health. And as you're dating, work on your relationship security. So that when you do get married, sex is far more likely to be good. All right. My husband and I wrote The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex, and I wrote The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex, which are wonderful manuals for people who are about to get married. And our prayer is that these will become the go-to bridal shower gifts and wedding gifts so that people can start well, and then in 15 years, maybe nobody will ever need the Great Sex Rescue. So that is the goal.
And I know that we've gone over time. Thank you so much for your generosity with that. We did, in fact, have a very large job to do, in essence, the sex education you should have had. We didn't even get to cover all the topics, of course. And so if there's any other questions you have, I do want to say, don't be afraid to look up information. There's a lot of fear that if you search things like, what is a pap test, a pap smear test, you're going to get like pornography or something on Google. I'll tell you now, medical websites do not have pornography on them. My job has also included research for an orgasm course. You should see the ridiculous things I had to search for that to find studies. I did not stumble across any porn accidentally. So please, just if you phrase things medically, it's a great tool. There are so many things. There's Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, even things like kidscare.au or kidscare.ca, I forget which one it is, but Canada or Australia has like a one that they send teenagers to all the time. There's tons of information on this, and don't be afraid to look it up, okay? Knowledge is not dangerous. Knowledge is actually your friend here. So don't be embarrassed to ask questions. Don't be embarrassed to look things up. And yes. I really hope that this generation gets to change that trajectory that we found in She Deserves Better in our survey for that, where education was pretty solid, and then it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. I'd like to see that go back up. So let's just work on that all together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jody, we don't have a lot of time, but do you want to see if people have questions?
Yeah, I think if you have questions, you want to stay, great, and I will carry a mic around if you need to leave because we've gone a little over an hour. And feel free. It's okay. No, no questions asked, no guilt. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if anybody has any questions and wants to stick around, we'll take a few questions.
Mm-hmm. I think this is the kind of thing no one's going to ask any questions for. We should have done paper. Yeah, we're just. And we also want to say, if people travel to see us from my email list, I'd love to meet you. So come on to the back and say hi.
But let's at least
I can't see any of this.
Jordan.
Oh, I should have left this.